raised in a largely secular Jewish household. I was exposed to Jewish traditions,
Hmm.
but like many Jews, because we're such a minority population in the country, we're as familiar with Christianity as most Christians are. Um, so,
Hmm.
uh, and I've, as a result of writing my book, I've had the pleasure of interacting with a number of evangelicals, especially Michael Licona, and he and I have debated each other on occasion and developed a friendship in the course of doing so. So,
Yeah. Let me just interject here real quick.
mm,
Dr. Lacona was my professor, one of my professors for my master's degree. So I know Mike.
oh,
Yeah.
you were at Houston then?
I was at HBU when it was HBU. It's now HCU, Houston Christian University.
Uh-huh,
So I'm familiar with Mike. I've read the Resurrection book,
uh-huh.
his magnum opus there, and I kind of agree with your conclusions about it in your book, which we can get to later. But just for some background there, so you don't have to fill in all the details about Mike. But yes, I know I don't know him personally, but he would probably remember me.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
he's a
So
very
anyway,
nice guy.
he is. He really is. He really is. I like him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was your I'd have to go on. I didn't know you actually had debated Dr. Lacona. So that
Yeah, on several occasions.
how did you meet Mike in researching your book?
No, how did it work? As a result of writing my book, I was invited, can't remember the first, maybe it was at the Ohio State or something, but I think a Christian student group organized a debate between the two of us. Of course, Mike
Okay.
is very well known for his work in the historicity of the Gospels.
Right.
And as a result of writing my book, I guess my name was sort of out there as someone who would have an opposing view, and the student group thought it would make for a good debate, and it did, I think.
Excellent. Yeah, Mike does a lot of the debating with Dr.
Hmm.
Ehrman. We've
Yes.
had Bart Ehrman. We need to get Mike on the book club. I actually, in all the years, we've never invited Mike. I need to probably, he would be a great follow up to your interview. I think that would be great. I will try to get a
Hmm.
hold of him.
Yeah.
We've had Dr. Ehrman on the Atheist and Christian Book Club a couple
Yeah,
of
I
years
saw
ago.
that.
Yeah. And we've had Jesus mythicists, we've had Richard Carrier, we've had Bob Price, we've had all the top notch atheist guns over the years, as well
Uh-huh.
as evangelical Christians.
Uh-huh.
So welcome to our family, Larry.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank
Yes,
you. And
yes,
I really appreciate what you're doing. This idea of introducing devout Christians to non-Christians to
hmm,
kind of indicate that we're not monsters. I think that's a great purpose.
that's right. I am myself a member of not only this book club, but I am also a member of an all atheist book club in Dallas. And
Hmm.
strangely enough, they let me lead the discussion every once in a while. So,
Ah,
but I'm
okay.
not allowed to proselytize. Um,
Uh-huh.
so I have to kind of talk about the book and kind of leave my Christianity to the side, and then just kind of go from there. But anyway, so secular Jewish, um, interested in this question of God's existence, maybe more so. Why, in particular, sort of an epistemological approach to the resurrection? What engendered this interest in your
Uh-huh.
thesis, your book?
Uh, honestly, I think I was ruminating on these topics as a result of, let's see, this was 8, 9 years ago. There were lots of discussions about gay marriage at the time, and a lot of Christian opposition to gay marriage. Uh, and I thought, given the influence that the Christian community has on the shape that political decisions take, I was despairing that a a belief, the sorts of beliefs that on which Christianity is based struck me as unjustified, and that made it seem to me that the Christian influence on political decisions that affect ordinary people's lives was especially regrettable. It would be one thing, I thought, if the kind of influence uh, imposed on politicians came from a body of belief that had adequate justification. But to my mind, the Christian beliefs don't have adequate justification, which made the prominence of their uh, or the significance of their views to political thinking especially regrettable.
So your idea was go to the root of this from a logical and philosophical perspective.
Yeah,
And
I thought I should write a book that might. Um, the book wasn't intended to convince Christians that they were wrong. I don't think any single book could change a devout Christian's mind. I'd be very surprised about that. But the least I wanted to accomplish with the book is to provide non-Christians with a way to interact with Christians and ask the sorts of probing questions that a Christian should be able to answer, and
mm-hmm,
also to introduce to Christians the kind of work in epistemology that philosophers do that would challenge their beliefs in a way that they had to take seriously these challenges and think
mm-hmm.
harder, reflect more on the justification they had for their own beliefs. And
Yeah, I think
and I
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, finish up. I'm
I,
sorry. We're on a
no,
little delay, so
yeah, and I think the book succeeded to those ends. I know from speaking with members of audiences of debates in which Mike and I participated, Mike Lacona and I participated. I had Christian students coming up to me after a debate and saying, I've never heard an atheist speak before. I've never heard these sorts of challenges to my belief. And thank you very much. You've given me a lot to think about.
yes,
So
yeah.
those are the comments that really uh, I found fulfilling.
Yes, and as you know, behind the scenes, we've been emailing last couple of months, and I
Mm-hmm.
sent you an article that I will thank you again for sort of refreshing my. The older I get, the more I have to go back and remind myself of why I believe what I believe. So I
Oh,
appreciate the exercise that your book gave me. In terms of, I love that. That's how we got into apologetics. Was like, can I answer this question? Taking the question seriously, and then asking myself, how would I answer this?
mm-hmm.
And that's always. It's not like, oh, I can answer it this way, because you're always encountering people that think a little differently, and so you just can't have this monolithic, encyclopedic kind of apologetic response to everybody's question. You have to take people where they're at and nuance the questions. And so I appreciated the exercise of going through your book and once again refamiliarizing myself with some common objections to, especially the resurrection of Jesus.
Uh-huh.
So thank you. I will say thank you as well, because as I keep saying, it's a very nice book. You're not Dawkins. You're not
I'm not Dawkins. I'm not Dennett. I'm not Harris.
right, right,
I'm not
right.
among the four horsemen. Yes.
Yeah. So that's we almost had Mr. Dawkins on, Dr. Dawkins on a couple of years ago, but he thought that his presence in the book club would be a distraction. So he's like, well, just enjoy my book. But he did write to us and told us he liked what we were doing, but he didn't want to appear because he thought, and I think he was right. I think we would have been so distracted by the persona of Richard Dawkins that we probably never would have discussed the book. So,
Yeah,
but
he
anyway,
does fill a room.
he sure does. I wanted to talk about the justification. We can the first half of this, and then maybe the second half we can talk a little bit more about
Hmm.
the objections to the resurrection itself. I'm sure you're familiar with Bertrand Russell and Kurt Gödel in the early 20th century. Russell's paradox, right, where he on his 80th birthday in 1952 he confessed that he wanted a kind of certainty And the quote is, I think, that people had of religious faith, but he wanted that kind of certitude for mathematics. But then he describes this, and I have this quote here. He said, I was continually reminded of the fable about the elephant and the tortoise. Having constructed an elephant upon which the mathematical world could rest, I found the elephant tottering and proceeded to construct a tortoise to keep the elephant from falling. But the tortoise was no more secure than the elephant, and after some 20 years of arduous toil, he was trying to 300 pages to try to prove 1 + 1 = 2. I came to the conclusion that there was nothing more that I could do in the way of making mathematical knowledge indubitable. So when we're talking about justification, Larry, from a philosophical perspective, there always seems to be an element that is beyond the reach of our ability to justify anything with complete certainty. Would you agree?
I think most epistemologists, I should preface my remarks by pointing out I'm not myself an expert in epistemology. I'm in a large philosophy department. I have colleagues who are experts in epistemology. So um, take what I say as the remarks of a fairly well-informed but not expert on the topic of epistemology. And most epistemologists today, I think, wouldn't demand absolute certainty as a condition for knowledge. They would instead replace the idea of absolute certainty with something like high probability or highly confirmed. Uh, Now, it does seem to me that there are some necessary truths, things that we can know, things about which we can be certain in the sense that we can't possibly be wrong. So, take for an example, everything is self-identical to itself. This is just a logical truth. Or the sum of the angles of a plane triangle is 180 degrees. This follows from our concept of what a triangle is. Now, what Gödel showed in response to Russell and Whitehead's work on grounding mathematics and logic was a very unexpected result. But there was no sort of a priori reason that Russell should have had to think that mathematics could be grounded in logic in a way that guaranteed its completeness. So I think, uh, uh, I mean, it was certainly too bad for Russell that this event occurred. But
Yeah.
but for me, justification involves high degree of confirmation, something like that.
Okay.
And we can say we know something when we cross some threshold, which I don't know what that threshold would be, but it does seem that I can know that there's a cup in front of me right now when I'm holding this cup in front of me.
Sure. One thing that comes up in this debate from a logical perspective, and I've been accused of this as an apologist myself, which has made me dug deeper into it, is that when this is more about a logic question than it is necessarily the Bible, but I'm just using the Bible as an example because it's what we're talking about. People say, well, it's circular reasoning to reference the Bible as a source of truth, and to try to steelman it, because I know both sides. I know both the answers to the questions. What, from a philosophical perspective, Larry, how do philosophers, secular or atheists, what is the argument with appealing to the Bible as a source of, as a kind of circular reasoning fallacy? That if you're appealing to Scripture as a source of truth, you're actually guilty of a logical fallacy. How do you see that? Because that seems to be at the hub of a lot of what we end up talking about as believers and non-believers, is a kind of a circularity in terms of how we know something to be true. Because you mentioned the Book of Mormon in your book. Latter-day Saints will refer to this as a source of truth. Christians refer to the Bible. Muslims refer to the Quran. So what is this fallacy of circularity, and how can we avoid it when we're talking about justified true belief?
I don't see a fallacy of circularity in the claim that the Bible might contain truths. I think the Bible probably contains lots of truths. The, where circularity is encountered is in an argument kind of like this. Suppose someone says, I believe in God because of what I've read in the Bible. The Bible reports stories about God's interventions in people's everyday lives, and I believe that. And then you say to that person, well, why do you think the Bible is a trustworthy source? And if the answer is because it's because God guarantees its truth, well, then we get a circularity because you can't appeal to the Bible to justify your belief in God and then appeal to God's existence to justify the veracity of the Bible. That would be
Okay.
circular.
So that would be circular. Would it be, let's take an example outside of scripture. If I presented, say, my driver's license, my Texas driver's license, whatever the case may be, it's a singular document that verifies who I am. And I can stand behind that and say, yeah, that's me. But ultimately, what's giving that document authority is the state of Texas, which is kind of, I mean, you can go to the state capitol in Austin and you can go talk to legislatures, but the authority that is invested in the driver's license when you present it at a place for a transaction or something, that authority remains kind of invisible. I mean, we don't have the practical means to try to justify whether or not my license is valid. Somebody might have a suspect that it might not be valid because it may look like I forged it or something. But when it comes to like other documents, well, this is true because this is me because this says it's me. Is that a similar appeal? What's the difference between, saying this driver's license identifies this driver's license is true versus saying that the Bible is true? Because I'm sort of, the state backs up my identity as God would back up the authority of Scripture. Is that similar at all, or am I missing something
I don't
analogous
see
here?
that as similar. The circularity that less careful thinkers seem to be guilty of is defending the existence of God by appeal to the Bible and then justifying their belief in the truth of what the Bible says by saying God secures that truth.
Okay, so it'd be like saying the driver's license is true because the driver's license says it's true.
Uh, let's see. I'm trying to figure out how to make the analogy to the driver's
It's
license. So
it's tricky. I don't mean to. It's just something that's always, for me personally, it's always somewhat unclear because it seems, here's where I'm getting at. It seems that there must be some kind of admissible circularity in our epistemology, because it seems like whatever it is, whatever our axioms are, our foundations for what we believe is true in a terms of assessing a justified true belief, it seems that there's always something outside our axioms that can't entirely avoid circularity. So I'll tell you, like, my name is Daniel Ray. Is that true because I said it's true? Am I sufficient evidence for myself, or do I need other things? And so it seems like in order to have a justified true belief, we have to. It seems like, and I'm not a philosopher, like you said. I'm not a professional epistemologist, but it seems like we need some kind of circularity, permissible circularity, as I call it, in order to establish an axiom going forward for what is truth. Do you think that's
well, what? No, I don't see circularity as usually involved in justification. So Daniel, you tell me your name is Daniel. I now have some justification for my belief that that's your name,
mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm.
and it's not as though I'm appealing to anything that basically asserts that same fact to justify my belief that that's your name. I believe it's your name because you've told me. Now, we can ask whether that's adequate justification, and
Mm-hmm.
ordinarily I think it is. If the context were different, if I knew that, or if I had reason to believe that uh, everybody on what's today, March 6th, would declare their name to be Daniel, no matter what their real name was, then then I would listen to you tell me your name, and I'd think it's possible that is your real name,
Right,
but
right.
because
I
it's
get it.
March 6th, I'm not really justified in believing that.
Well, I bring up the name example because my boss's name is on the screen here. So it's kind of
Uh-huh.
like, well, which one do you believe, Larry? Which one
Yeah,
is true?
yeah, that's true.
But that brings me to the point here, my final point on the epistemology topic. We could spend all day talking about this, of course, but it seems like whatever we hold, whatever philosophy, secular, atheist, whatever the case may be, religious, non-religious, it seems like there's one of the essential elements of justified true belief would be some kind of trust, that there's some kind of act on our part, like you just kind of expressed, that you would have to you accept that my name is Daniel based on feeling like you have no reason to distrust what I'm saying. So it seems like that, and I'm not saying this as a slight to anybody, but I think there is an element of trust, an act of trust that we must. I mean, if you don't trust somebody, right? What I'm getting at here is that you're likely not going to learn from them because you're constantly holding this tension of suspicion because you don't trust them. And so
Yes.
how important do you think the act of trust is in terms of knowing?
It depends on on what it is you're trying to learn. So most of my beliefs, most of my justified beliefs, don't rely on trust at all because they're beliefs about the sky being blue or living in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't I don't I don't believe these things because they've been reported to me and I trust the source. I believe these things because of my experiences in the world. Uh, Now, on the other hand, if the belief is based on just testimony, then of course it is very important to trust that source. And it could be that the source is generally trustworthy, uh, but whether you should trust any particular claim coming from that source depends not just on whether that source is trustworthy, but on the nature of the claim. So if you told me your name was Daniel, I wouldn't think twice about trusting you on that. If you told me that you were from Alpha Centauri, even though I generally trust you, you seem trustworthy, I would doubt you.
Gotcha. But you still have to, in your first example, trusting your senses, right? I mean, because we could
Yeah.
go down into the rabbit hole of sensory experience and whether or not we should trust those things. But
Yeah.
um,
Okay. If trust in that broader sense, then
in the broader
yes, I
sense,
agree.
right,
I
right,
agree with
right,
you. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. Final thoughts on the epistemology side of this question that you would want some takeaways that you would want both atheists and Christians uh, to understand and grapple with.
Uh, well, I think you asked just the right question when uh, introducing the idea of trust. The important things to think about when you're asking yourself whether to believe a report from a source is not just the general reliability of the source, but the credibility of what it is that source is relating to you. So
Mm-hmm.
for instance, as I discuss in my book, you can imagine a first grader who's generally reliable. When she tells you that the teacher was sick today, you believe her. And when she tells you that she had scraped her knee on the playground, you believe her. And when she says there's a fire alarm, you believe her. But when she says um, that there was an alien invasion at school today, you don't believe her. And what's changed is not her trustworthiness. She's a trustworthy little girl. What's changed is the nature of what it is she's reporting. Because alien invasions are so incredibly improbable, we have to sort of devalue our confidence in the report that she's giving us, even though she might be still a generally trustworthy person.
Okay. So that's a good point, for us to switch gears on that.
Okay.
A topic that is difficult, but definitely worthy of in further investigation. Are you familiar at all, just as an aside, with Alvin Plantinga's justified true belief for theists?
Well, I know some about his anti-naturalist views and his ideas about uh, uh, primitive truths,
Mm-hmm.
primitive beliefs. But
Mm-hmm.
it's been a long time since I've read Plantinga.
Yeah. Okay. I just was wondering about that because that's a whole nother
Yeah.
epistemic. Even Christians are a little concerned about some of the things that he says. But
Hmm.
anyway, a wonderful debate to get into the epistemology side of things. Let's dive into the central thesis that you're critiquing, which is not, you're not, be clear, I think, to be fair to you, you're not saying miracles are impossible, and you're not finally saying that the resurrection didn't happen, and you're not trying to tear faith away from people. You're just coming at this from a philosophical perspective and saying that from what I know about epistemology and philosophy, the belief in the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth is not indefensible, but unjustified. Could you
That's right.
clarify? Okay, could you clarify a little bit about those distinctions? Because people would see the subtitle of your book and think you're just attacking the resurrection, and you leave that open, but with a small degree of probability, but you don't write
Yes,
it off completely.
that's right. So yeah, great question, Daniel. Thanks. Let's first talk about the difference between uh, saying that something doesn't exist and you're not justified in believing that something exists. So uh, I could be very justified in doubting the existence of Bigfoot. Uh, I could give you all these reasons why I think Bigfoot doesn't actually exist. All of those reasons for doubting Bigfoot's existence are consistent with Bigfoot actually existing. It just is because of these reasons, I think that the fact of the matter is he does not exist. I may not be able to prove that he doesn't exist. Uh, and all I can say, though, is that with a very high probability, he doesn't exist. And the same attitude I take toward miracles in my book. I can't prove that Jesus never turned water into wine. I can't prove that Lazarus was never reborn. But I think when we consider the evidence on behalf of these claims, we should end up thinking that although these events might be possible, their occurrence is actually very, very unlikely. And for that reason, we should not believe that they actually occurred.
So you would find, I think, from what I read as I was reading this, that actual thesis, what you just said, is something that Christians could agree with. That these things that are described in the Bible are highly improbable. Nobody thinks that Jesus is still going around changing water into wine at weddings, or walking around graves calling people out of their graves by their first name. I think Christians could agree with you here on this thesis that these miracle events are highly improbable. So
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be a foundation upon which we can both agree, right?
Yeah, that's right. And then just to tie that observation into what we are discussing a few minutes ago, we should expect that just as this uh, little girl's report that the teacher was sick today is something that we're justified in believing on the basis of a report because sick teachers are unfortunately not very improbable events.
Mm-hmm.
But when she tells us that there was an alien invasion, we now have to think her general trustworthiness isn't sufficient to the task to justifying my belief in an alien invasion because of the extreme improbability of such an invasion. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just to follow this line of reasoning through, when the Bible reports that so and so was the son of so and so, it seems like that's not a very improbable occurrence. We're all born to someone after all, and so there's no reason not to accept the truth of that sort of claim. But when the Bible reports that someone had been dead for a few days and then reappeared alive, that's an extremely improbable event, and so we should want much more evidence before we accept that claim.
Okay. Do you know? I'm sure you're familiar with the actor, maybe not by his name, but the actor who played Chewbacca, Peter Mayhew.
Yes.
Yeah, Peter lived just south of me here in Texas in Granbury.
Hmm.
Passed away a few years ago. I can't help but wonder, this is just kind of a funny aside, I can't help but wonder if Peter ever took the suit and ran around in the woods with the Chewbacca suit on.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, that would be hilarious. If I
yeah.
had the suit, I would do it too.
But what I really like about that example, Daniel, is it I think it's a nice segue to other sorts of claims I make in the book, which
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
involve this idea of inference to the best explanation. And
Right, right.
we rely on this kind of inference whenever we're trying to explain some event, the cause of which we don't understand. So, classic case of inference, the best explanation is the detective who is trying to identify the murderer, and the detective collects evidence, footprints, fingerprints, motive, opportunity, things like that. And on the basis of all these bits of evidence, they then make an inference of the sort: what would best explain all this evidence I see before me? And if what best explains the presence of the footprint, the fingerprints, and the other sorts of things is that Frank was the murderer, then that's their conclusion. That's how they justify that conclusion. And with the Bigfoot example you just gave, we have people claiming to have seen this big hairy being walking around in the woods, and we can ask, well, what's the best explanation for these observations? One is that there is this actual creature named Bigfoot, who we've called Bigfoot, and another is that there's some really tall guy in an ape suit running around the woods. And it seems like, given what we know about the world, it's that second hypothesis that we ought to accept.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, excuse me. So what you're talking about there is abduction, which is
Yes.
a common. There's induction, deduction, and abduction, and I always get those confused. But inference to the best explanation based on our experiences with reality, correct, is kind of
Yes.
where we're going. That so we talk about. You talked about this briefly in terms of the nature of reality. And it reminded me of David Hume's argument to some extent. Now, I don't think you're on the same particular belief as Hume. I don't know. I could be misunderstanding you, but your approach to a miracle was something like a violation of the laws of nature, which is similar to Hume, but I don't want to pigeonhole you and misquote you. Is that your kind of view in general in terms of laws of nature and what a miracle would be, that they would be in violation of the laws that we have?
Yeah, I think miracles have to be some kind of supernatural event. And to say that something is supernatural is to say that it occurs somehow as a result of a non-natural force. And to say that something is non-natural is to say that it's inconsistent with nature. It's inconsistent with the laws by which nature operates.
So, could it be, taking a theist perspective here for just a second, could a miracle be not so much a violation, but this is kind of how I personally see it, that a miracle is more of a revelation, not so much that something that violates the laws, but our understanding of the laws, our epistemic the totality of our epistemic understanding of nature is incomplete. So that nature, when we see a miracle, nature is God, the supernatural, is revealing deeper laws rather than violating the law. So like a police officer, a rookie police officer who pulls somebody over for speeding, he's not fully aware that there are some vehicles in certain situations where exceeding the speed limit is in complete harmony with the laws, that this vehicle has an exception to those laws. So it's the gentleman he pulls over ends up being a detective in an undercover police car. He was not in violation of the law because there was, so in other words, the rookie realizes at that moment that there is a deeper traffic law. And I think to some degree, what do you think of the idea that miracles are revelations of deeper laws that are in accordance with nature, and not because and I think, charitably, I would say that yes, when a miracle is performed, we don't normally see 6 stone water pots filled with water turn into wine. That seems to violate what it seems to violate, rather than the laws of nature, would be our understanding of the laws of nature. Could that be a possibility?
It could be, but it doesn't seem to me that that way of understanding laws of nature would be friendly to Christians, and here's why. So let's just talk about a pretty available law of nature, that water freezes at 32 degrees, and we take this to be a law because through millennia of observations, it's always happened that water has frozen at 32 degrees. We don't take it to be miraculous that water freezes at 32 degrees because we've learned that that's just how nature operates. We don't have to think that every time water freezes, God is somehow intervening to turn liquid water into solid. But now let's turn to a miracle, say turning water into wine. And on your idea, turning water into wine is not some kind of supernatural violation of a law of nature. It's a revelation. It's a law of nature that we're unfamiliar with. But then that means that when Jesus turns water into wine, he didn't do anything that didn't happen naturally. It's just on certain occasions with certain background conditions, just as water will freeze at 32 degrees, water will turn into wine. And so there's no reason, if that's a result of a law of nature, to think that when water turns into wine, that's any evidence at all for a supernatural being.
Okay. Some theists might say, I would be among them, I think, that all the separation between natural and nature and supernature seems to be the result of maybe what we might call the Enlightenment, or the growth of naturalistic sciences, empirical sciences, and the separation of science from theology back in the late Middle Ages. As the early natural philosophers would think, that the study of nature, like I'm thinking of the chemist Robert Boyle and James Clerk Maxwell and all these people, saw that even in the nature's laws were undergirded by what the Hebrew says in Hebrews 1, that God upholds all things by the word of his power. And so even in what we might call today natural acts, that God is still acting in upholding everything. So even in the freezing, if it's the freezing of water or the turning of water into wine, that God's agency is still behind that. But in the difference between water freezing and wine coming from water in a miraculous sense is God still upholding all the laws, but revealing a special law in that sense. That seems to be what I would think to be the strongest theist argument in terms of that. It gets back to how would we, Larry, define the borderline between nature and supernature, or natural and supernatural? Where do you think that comes from, and how can we properly negotiate that in this discussion?
I confess not to really understanding what is meant by supernatural. I think of nature as uh, what exists in time and in space. So I guess the supernatural would be something that exists apart from time and space.
Hmm.
And I think that if that's your conception of the supernatural, you face a really hard problem in understanding how anything supernatural could have any sort of effect on the natural world. Uh, as we understand cause and effect, we think of causes as somehow in contact with their effects,
Hmm.
transferring energy, or impacting in some way. Think of billiard balls. We understand why the motion of one billiard ball will cause the motion of another billiard ball. But now imagine a supernatural cause of a billiard ball moving. What I want to understand is how something that is outside of time and space, has no mass, has no energy, could cause a billiard ball to move. It just seems to me a sort of hopeless task until I understand better what the supernatural is and how it works.
If the supernatural is responsible for the natural, assuming the distinctive line here, because one of the things that is being discussed in physics, I'm sure you know, is this idea of where does energy come from at the beginning? How do we are we getting a free lunch in terms of what Alan Guth said one time? So the idea that our universe began with a burst of energy and has since been winding down entropically. One of the great mysteries in physics is where does this energy come from? And a lot of theists have capitalized on this as being evidence for a divine creator at the beginning who gives not only the physical space-time fabric, but gives it all the energy that it needs to function, of course. But now the other side of that is that a lot of people would argue, well, that's just deism. God just sets it all up and then runs away. But some Christians will say, no, he upholds everything. But are you kind of saying that you don't see how a supernatural agent would have the capacity to provide energy to the universe? Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah, I don't see it. I think it's a version of the kind of mind body problem that Descartes faced. So Descartes thought that bodies were one kind of substance characterized by having some extension, some volume, and some mass, and having a location in space. That's what bodies are.
Mm-hmm.
And then he thought that minds are souls, and he couldn't say a lot of couldn't describe positive attributes of a soul. Instead, he would define them in negative terms. A soul is something that doesn't have mass, doesn't have volume, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
exist in a location in space. And his idea was that that's what a mind is, that's what a body is. And then it's obvious that our minds and bodies do interact. When I think a thought about moving my arm, which is something mental, my arm, which is something physical, moves. So it's clear that bodies and minds interact. But then uh, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia pointed out to Descartes that it's very difficult to understand how something without mass or extension or location can cause a body to do something. And
Mm.
Descartes never had an adequate response to Princess Elizabeth's concern. And I see the same problem arising for anyone who wants to say that God can simply, or anything supernatural, can simply cause things to happen in the world. I'd like to know how that happens. It seems to me a mystery that uh, should lead anyone to be skeptical about that as a way of explaining an occurrence in the natural world.
So when you're kind of on a quest for an explanation, is your explanation the kind of explanation that you're after is something what we might call empirical or tangible? What are the mechanics behind how God might orchestrate motion and energy in the physical universe? Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah,
Like,
that's where I'm coming from too. And also, I'm sure you're familiar with this this criticism known as the God in the gap sort of
Oh
argument.
yes. Oh yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, just to give an example for people maybe not familiar, uh, um, perhaps once upon a time, people didn't understand why an eclipse would occur. Uh, they found the existence of eclipses completely inexplicable. Sorry, that's a difficult word to say.
It is.
Uh, and so they fill in the gap in their understanding by saying, "Oh, God did it." But that's really no explanation at all. That's an admission that you don't have an explanation. And so when you say that, this big bang occurred, we don't know how it occurred, where the energy came from. Well, it must have been God. That seems to me exactly analogous to the argument in defense of God's causing an eclipse.
I think I've heard a lot of Christian philosophers talk about the response to the God of gaps argument, and I would agree with you. I think a lot of people do make that mistake in just saying God did it. But I think there's two explanations on the table. We're both drinking coffee, unless you're having tea.
Actually, this is just water.
Oh, it's just water. Okay, well, I have water and I have coffee. We could ask the question like, Larry, how did the water get in your cup? Or I could say, how was the coffee made? And I could say, well, Larry did it. And that wouldn't be wrong. And how did the coffee get in my little sippy thing here? Well, Dan made the coffee. Now that's not wrong. That's one kind of explanation, but it's not a substitute for my little Nespresso machine, like the mechanics of the machine that did all that. So there's two things there that you could explain coffee in terms of a coffee machine and all the mechanics that go along with it. But you could also say that there's a personal explanation for it. Now, I'm not one to substitute God for, I've talked to a lot of cosmologists and astrophysicists in my time. I co-wrote a book on the universe, so I know this question intimately. The idea that we're not saying, find a mechanical explanation for where the energy came from. That's fine. We're not, but I think from a theistic perspective, you could say that you could find all the mechanics of how the universe came into being and still say that God is ultimately responsible for it without being guilty of the God of the gaps fallacy. Does that make any sense?
If you had a complete explanation, why would you then feel the need to bring God into the account?
I think for me personally, just on a personal level, I think it would be a matter of how we see evidence of other minds just on this terrestrial level. What would be the evidence of other minds? Well, there's laws, there must be lawmakers. If mathematics describes the universe, I think it was Alexander Vilenkin in his book, Many Worlds in One. At the conclusion, he says, look, the laws of the universe are mathematical in nature. It seems like we need these before the beginning of the universe. What's the medium of mathematics? That seems to be the mind. So, I mean, Vilenkin's not a theist, but he seems to conclude, at least theoretically, that does this mean if mind is the medium of mathematics and mathematics seems to be necessary before the beginning of the universe, was there a mind before the universe? And so I think from a theistic perspective, I think the answer of adding God to it would be, it seems like what we have in the universe is something like a mind behind it, perhaps. So that seems to be the other side of the coin to it. But big debate we can't settle in 10 minutes.
Right.
But since we have just a short time, I do think this is going to be the central thing. It depends on where our discussion goes for our book club, but I did want to mention this just to bring this up to get your thoughts on it quickly. You say on page 44 in your book, in terms of the topic of this, it says God's intentions, desires, habits, and so on are simply not available to us. And that's in the larger context of trying to figure out, well, why these miracles and what was God thinking and why did God do this? Could you expand a little bit upon that with what time we got left, and then just kind of speak to that contextually and how you've established that we don't have God's intentions in this?
Yeah, sure. So whenever you perform an inference, the best explanation. I gave an example earlier of the detective who is implicating Frank in the murder on the basis of the evidence available. Let's just choose fingerprints as one kind of evidence. we can ask the question, well, why are fingerprints good evidence of Frank's presence in this room? And we can answer that question. The answer would go something like this. We now know that fingerprints are very idiosyncratic, and every person has fingerprints that differ from every other person's fingerprints. And that's why we're counting fingerprints as good evidence for the presence of Frank in this room. So I've been able to justify the use of fingerprints as a source of evidence because I can provide an account of why fingerprints are a valuable source of evidence. Now, take a miracle like Aaron turning a staff into a serpent. We want to say, well, he did this through divine agency of some kind. And then I ask, well, what makes you think it's divine agency? Why would God have done that? And now you have to provide me with a story about what God must have been thinking about in order to make him the kind of being who at that moment would turn Aaron's staff into a serpent. Now, in the case of fingerprints, we can do some research and discover that each individual has fingerprints that differ from every other's. But what kind of research do we do to establish that God is the kind of agent who at that time would have turned Aaron's staff into a serpent? If we don't have an answer to that, then it seems that we can develop alternative explanations for why that happened that are every bit as good as the God hypothesis. I could say something like, I could even imagine that if we attribute to God a dislike of snakes, that the fact that the staff turned into a serpent is evidence against God's intervention, since God hates snakes so much. So until we can settle what God had in mind, I don't understand why we should think that simply the event in which a staff turns into a serpent is evidence of God's existence.
Okay. For alternative hypotheses, which is pretty much you go through the latter half in your book and you talk about and you give some alternative hypotheses to what could have been the cause or the source of miracles. When it comes to alternative hypotheses, whether we're theists or Christians, in terms of let's just say the resurrection, since we're talking about how important, because a lot of people will say, well, we want more evidence for the resurrection. We want more tangible, physical, textual reporting evidence of the resurrection in order to have a justified true belief. But how important is it also for alternative explanations to meet, because you outline 5 different criteria, speaking historically, which you're taking from historians. You're not making these up. This is how people do history, basically. You give 5 points. How important, if it's important for the New Testament to meet these standards, how important would it be to have alternative explanations also meet those standards? How would you see that?
Oh, I'm not partial against the biblical account. It just is, as you said, I think that there are other accounts that could meet those standards. And so my claim is that we have no account actually that would justify the sorts of events that occurred in the Bible. So the existence of God would be one such account. The existence of multiple gods would be another account. The existence of very powerful extraterrestrials would be another account. And I don't think we have adequate evidence to justify our belief in any of those alternatives.
Okay. All right. Well, that's clear. And it is 11 o'clock. So we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much. I think it was a good summation of the book. Enough to get people at least interested in reading it, and sufficient enough for people to participate in the discussion that we'll be having in June. So final thoughts, Dr. Shapiro, on the atheist Christian debate. Anything you want to add, and we'll wrap up with your last words here.
Uh, I I just want to express to you my pleasure that you received me with such cordiality. I think if I want to speak about in general terms atheist Christian debates, I think they should be involving conversations just of the sort that the two of us had, where we're respectful and listen to each other and uh, pose good questions.
Yeah, I think what I've learned in these discussions myself is that that confidence generally, if you're confident in what you believe, that's attractive. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you believe is true. But if you're really confident in what you believe, then I think that you can leave the personal stuff aside. Because I think a lot of times when things get personal, it seems to equate to more of someone being less confident in what they believe, and they have to go ad hominem route instead of resting in the truth of what they believe. And so I think both of our background knowledges contribute to that. We're confident in what we believe, and that allows for the cordiality to go forward. So thank you so much for your time, Larry.
Thank you, Daniel.
In June. We'll see you in June.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, especially now after meeting you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm an introvert, so I tend to have a little bit more bark in what I write. I still have to work on that, but I'm trying to get my person. I like this stuff, but it's very hard. It's kind of ironic that I am in a position to where I'm in these these in between discussions because I don't like conflict. I'm a lot more concessional just so I avoid conflict. So for me to be even facilitating these kind of discussions, for me to be in an atheist book club is just, I know you don't believe, but to me it's a miracle that somebody as introverted as I am is involved in this at all.
Yeah, I think that the two of us don't differ that much in those respects.